Welcome, scholars, to today's lesson, lesson 2-1.7, the Yuan Dynasty. Today's lesson is going to briefly go into a period of Chinese history that needs a little backstory before we get into our main story on the Ottoman Safavids and the Mughals. Chinese history is long. It's the longest continuous civilization on the planet, and it really dates back in an imperial sense to the Xia dynasty, which started about 2050 BC. So this has been around for a really long time. We're talking about 4,000 years of history within the Chinese Empire. Now, the Chinese were themselves ruled by dynasties, and a dynasty is a ruling family that traditionally passed from father to son, although through different periods it sometimes went from between brothers or passed between uncles and nephews, but it was one ruling family that governed the empire. And the Chinese believed very much in this idea that these ruling families, these dynasties, had a mandate from heaven, that heaven had designated this family to be in charge. And if heaven hadn't designated this family to be in charge, they wouldn't be, which meant that if a family was ever overthrown, well, this was seen as the mandate of heaven, that they were only overthrown, they were only allowed to fall because that was the will of the heavens. I don't say God here because Chinese had a different sense of heavens versus gods, and that's far too complex for this lesson, but they believed in the mandate of heaven, and this would guide their dynasties. And this mandate of heaven during the Middle Ages led to the rise of the Yuan Dynasty. The Yuan Dynasty was established by Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, depending on our pronunciation. Kublai becomes the ruler of China when he conquers China in the 1260s. Kublai was one of the grandsons of Genghis Khan, this Mongol emperor that we learned so much about. And when that Mongol empire starts to break apart, Kublai is left in charge of China, and he establishes his dynasty and really does what he can to make his Mongol rule in China kind of adhere to and mesh with Chinese ideas. And by doing so, so well, he establishes a dynasty that lasts almost 100 years, and this is the Yuan period. Now, yes, we're talking about the Mongols again. I did promise that they would come up again and again, and here they are again. In the impact of the Mongols on China, we see that it obviously was incredibly harmful, as the Mongols were to most areas that they went in and they dominated, but also to most areas where they went in. They brought a lot of beneficial stuff as well. To the negative end, about half of the Chinese population dies during the Mongol conquest. A lot of this is directly as a result of the Mongols. You resist the Mongols, they kill you. And there was a lot of resistance at first, and the Mongols went in and they executed whole towns, villages, cities worth of people. But it was also during this Mongol invasion of China that the Black Death really gets going. So many of the Chinese are also dying from the plague. It's not just the Mongols. Now, many would argue that the Black Death gets going because of the chaos created by these invasions, and I think there's a legitimate argument there. But one way or the other, winds up being about half of the Chinese population that passes away during this invasion. Now, that's a negative. The positive side is that the Yuan wind up being very effective, very efficient rulers. And they take over China during a period of division. There was the Western Xia, the Jin, and the Song dynasties, three different dynasties that had divided up China. And this was during one of China's numerous periods where they become divided. The Yuan are going to unite them, and unite them in a way that they're never really again divided. Chinese leadership and rule from the Yuan period on is far more united, far more efficient, far more effective than it was before, and their territory dramatically improves. So here we have a picture of the entire Mongol Empire, with this kind of being, where the Yuan were. And if I go back a slide, you can see this is the Yuan China. So if we follow the outline of modern China, we see that Yuan Dynasty China was actually substantially larger than even modern China is. So this rule was beneficial to China in many ways, expanded their territory, improved their government, improved their wealth. It also is going to be the period where East-West connection is accelerated. Marco Polo, who's this Venetian merchant slash explorer, is going to travel to China during the Yuan Dynasty. And he's going to be the first European to travel to China and return to Europe. There may have been a number of others that traveled to China, but who never returned. He's going to return and he's going to tell stories about this wealth and this power of the Chinese that is unbelievable even to a Venetian. And this is during a high point of Venice. Venice is wealthy. Venice is powerful. And what he sees in China and what he sees with Kublai Khan is it's a different category of wealth and power. And it makes Europeans very interested in China. Europeans want more and more contact with this wealthy empire in the East, and exploration really does explode as a result of Marco Polo. This leads to the exchange of ideas, which flourishes, it thrives as the Mongols control the Silk Road. We discussed in our last lesson on the Silk Road that the Mongols had unified this and allowed a lot of travel with low taxation, wanted to encourage this trade between East and West. And Europe and China both want this. A lot of goods, a lot of ideas are exchanged. But throughout this exchange, all these goods are passing through the Middle East. Middle East is an area that is controlled by the Mongols, but not particularly strongly. We start to see this disrupted by Tamerlane, who we learned about a while ago, and it's going to just continue as Mongol rule or a semi-Mongol rule of people like Tamerlane is interrupted, and we start to see the rise of new empires. These new empires are going to appear along that Silk Road. They are former Mongol territories, but they are not themselves Mongol in any way. These are going to be the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal empires. And they're going to incorporate Chinese technology of gunpowder. And they're going to take the Mongol advancements and weaponization of gunpowder, and they're going to take it even further. And now we start to see like really true cannons and guns being invented and used throughout these empires. They were the first to use a cannon, but they're going to really advance the use of cannon. And with this use of gunpowder, they very quickly are able to dominate everybody else in their region and become extremely powerful. And if somebody's still flinging stones at you and you're firing exploding cannonballs back at them, that's going to be a pretty short battle. And the Ottomans, Safavids, and the Mughals all arise with this use of gunpowder. They expand rapidly, and they really do dominate that region. As part of that domination, they start cutting off that Silk Road, and we've alluded to that in the past, and we'll get to that again in the future. But once that Silk Road is shut down, that's going to change the world in many ways. So I know you've been waiting for it. These are our DBQ topics, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, and we're going to be going much more in depth with them as we move forward. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I'll see you next time.